Okay, let's unpack this. On the surface, leasing a residential condominium unit, it looks exactly like renting any apartment,
It
right?
seems that way.
You sign a lease,
Yeah.
you pay monthly rent, you deal with a landlord, but that similarity is, um, it's really deceptive. What you are actually entering into, whether you're the investor or the resident, is this multi-layered legal and financial structure.
Right.
And it makes condo leasing fundamentally different. It's more volatile and, frankly, far more complex than traditional renting.
That's the key distinction we really need to master today. Our mission, I think, is pretty clear. We want to equip you, the listener, with crucial, deep knowledge about the unique rights, the responsibilities, and maybe most importantly,
The due diligence.
the intense due diligence necessary when you're engaging with these properties.
Yeah.
We're going way beyond the basics to show you exactly where the pitfalls lie for both the landlord and the tenant.
And the whole conflict, it really springs from one profound difference. A traditional rental building has a single owner and only tenants?
Simple structure.
Super simple. A condominium building is a mixture of individual unit owners. Some live there, some are investors leasing out their units. And this introduces the central friction into the whole relationship.
It's clash.
It's a clash between the individual unit owner's investment goals and the overwhelming collective authority of the condominium corporation.
Precisely. When an investor buys a condo, they are buying an asset, but, and this is the key, they are simultaneously buying into a mini democracy. They become one voice in a community of owners who, through their elected board of directors and professional management, they enforce rules, they make financial decisions.
All designed to protect property values.
To protect the collective property values and ensure a high standard of living for everyone. So landlords are not fully autonomous, and tenants, well, they have to abide by decisions over which they have zero influence. Understanding that dynamic individual asset versus collective governance, that's the key to mastering this whole thing.
So let's start where the quality meets the complexity. From the tenant's perspective, why would a prospective tenant willingly choose to live in a setting that demands they follow rules made by strangers?
Well, the answer is often the environment itself.
The quality of it.
The appeal for tenants usually boils down to quality, efficiency, and amenities that, older purpose-built rental buildings simply can't compete with. Condominium units, especially in dense urban markets, are often new construction
Or recently renovated resale.
Exactly. So this means less structural wear and tear in the unit and, critically, in the common areas. The elevators, the lobbies, the hallways are generally pristine and frequently updated.
And we're talking about modern efficiency, which translates directly into what? Cost savings and quality of life.
Absolutely. You're typically looking at newer, more efficient HVAC systems, better insulation, modern appliances.
Less breakdown.
Way less disruption from major maintenance, and it ensures lower utility bills, which is a massive draw. But the real pull, I think, comes from the amenities and the high-end security features that are built right into the structure.
Okay, I think we have to call out in-suite laundry as the defining convenience. I mean, getting rid of the communal laundry room is such a powerful incentive for a tenant.
Oh, it's huge.
What else defines that luxury experience?
Well, it goes way beyond laundry. We're talking about integrated security, often managed 24/7 by a concierge or gate guards, using sophisticated access control, fobs, biometrics, secure package management systems.
Right, the stuff you just don't get elsewhere.
And architecturally, condos prioritize natural light. They often have floor-to-ceiling windows, open concept layouts that really maximize space and appeal. So for the tenant, they're renting a meticulously managed, up-to-date home with conveniences you normally associate with luxury homeownership, not renting.
That high standard is clearly the draw, but that standard is maintained by this powerful engine, the community of owners. This isn't just a group of neighbors. This is a legal governing authority that completely changes the landlord-tenant relationship.
It changes everything. In a traditional apartment building, the hierarchy is simple. Tenant pays the owner. In a condo, the unit owner is also a member of the corporation. And through the elected board of directors, these owners create the foundational rules, they manage the budget, they guide the day-to-day operations.
And their core mission.
Their core mandate is protecting the collective real estate investment, and that collective decision-making, it just supersedes the individual owner.
So the landlord, who signed the lease and is responsible for maintenance inside the unit, is just one voice in a very large choir when it comes to the building itself.
That's the landlord's dilemma. They're running a business, but they have to adhere to external decisions like, say, rules mandating specific aesthetic changes, or even worse, a massive assessment for infrastructure repair, and they only hold one vote.
And the tenant.
The tenant, in turn, must accept and tolerate the authority established by this collective of owners, which is then enforced rigorously by the condominium management company.
Which means the rules the tenant must follow aren't just what the landlord put in the lease. They're dictated by the corporation's own governing documents. So let's talk about those restrictions on leasing, because those are key compliance requirements for the landlord.
Due diligence here is just paramount. A landlord has to understand that before they can even advertise or lease their unit, they must first comply with the restrictions inside the corporation's foundational documents: the declaration, the bylaws, and the rules.
Okay, we need to unpack that legal hierarchy. For someone trying to master this, understanding which document holds which power is essential to knowing what's actually enforceable. So it's a declaration, a bylaw, and a rule.
Think of it like a constitution, legislation, and then regulation. The declaration is the condominium's constitution. It defines the units, the common elements, how costs are shared, and critical limitations on how the property can be used. It's incredibly difficult to change, usually requiring like 80% or 90% owner consent.
This is very stable.
Very stable. Then you have the bylaws. These govern the actual operation of the corporation, how the board is elected, how meetings are run, general policies on property management. They're moderately difficult to change, usually needing a simple majority of owner votes.
Okay.
And finally, you have the rules. These are the day-to-day operational guidelines, pool hours, restrictions on moving, how to book the party room. These are the easiest to change. The board can typically just pass them, though owners usually have some kind of appeal period.
And the landlord has to give the tenant all three of these documents.
All three, because the tenant is bound by all of them.
That clarity helps a lot. So what specific restrictions do these documents usually impose on a landlord's ability to actually lease their unit?
They're primarily focused on maintaining community stability and, preventing the unit from being operated like a business. Common examples include minimum rental terms, say, prohibiting any lease less than 6 months, to ensure stable occupancy and stop the building from feeling like a hotel.
Right.
Some corporations might impose a maximum number of rentals per unit per year, maybe 2, to manage turnover. And, absolutely critical, the requirement for residential use only. That means short-term rentals, hotel stays, or operating a walk-in commercial business are strictly forbidden.
And this leads directly to this idea of condominium pride of ownership, which sounds wonderful, but you highlighted that it creates unpredictability for a lease. How so?
It creates enormous cost, unpredictability, and access inconvenience. Owners, they're proud of their investment, so they vote for high standards. That can mean installing new, expensive lobby finishes or mandating a complex multi-week maintenance schedule for the exterior of the building. While this benefits the tenant with high quality, the landlord absorbs the potentially increased cost and the tenant absorbs the inconvenience.
What kind of inconvenience are we talking about that could impact a tenant in the middle of their lease?
Think about balcony restoration. The board votes for it, the work takes 6 weeks, and the tenant's balcony, which they thought was part of their exclusive enjoyment, is completely inaccessible during that time.
Wow.
Or a new security system gets installed, requiring multiple entries into their unit over a week for calibration. The lease might be stable, but the physical environment and the rules about access are constantly subject to change, decided on by owners who don't necessarily prioritize the tenant's schedule.
And what happens if the owners vote for new rules, say, restricting the size of pet carriers in the lobby or changing the hours for the gym? Does the tenant just have to suck it up?
They absolutely have to accept it. The new restrictions, once they're validly passed by the board or the owners, are binding on all residents. The landlord has to immediately notify the tenant of the change. This lack of a voice for the tenant, where their quality of life can be altered by a vote they couldn't even participate in, is a key constraint of condo living.
You also flag the owner-occupied ratio as a key metric that every prospective landlord or tenant should really look at. Why does that number give us so much insight into the future of a building?
It's the pulse of the corporation's priorities. If a building is, say, 85% owner-occupied, it means 85% of the decision-makers live there. Their primary focus is usually long-term aesthetic perfection, quiet enjoyment, and high maintenance standards.
Which is great for a tenant's quality of life.
It is, but it almost certainly guarantees higher maintenance fees because owners are willing to spend more to keep the property perfect.
And conversely, what if the ratio is low, maybe 50% rental units?
A low owner occupancy ratio often signifies that the majority of owners are pure investors, and investors generally prioritize low common element fees to maximize their profit margins.
Right.
This can result in boards deferring non-essential maintenance or costly cosmetic upgrades. So while the landlord enjoys lower monthly fees, the long-term tenant may find the building starts to look tired, amenities are frequently out of service, and major deferred repairs are just looming on the horizon.
Which increases the risk of a future financial shock.
A huge one. And it's also vital for financing. High renter ratios can sometimes impact the ability of future buyers, whether they're owner-occupiers or other investors, to get mortgages, because lenders view buildings with low owner occupancy as potentially riskier investments.
So that ratio isn't just about fees. It's about the building's long-term health and the investor's exit strategy, a crucial piece of due diligence that's often overlooked.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's pivot now to the investor, the person juggling the books. The complexities in condo governance translate directly into unique financial risks and substantial legal burdens. If you are a landlord, you are renting an asset that is governed by external forces, starting with financial planning and those notoriously unpredictable costs.
This is where amateur investors often get tripped up. When they're calculating rent, they treat the mortgage as their fixed cost, but they wrongly assume the mandatory monthly maintenance fees are also fixed. They are not.
They are a variable.
A responsible landlord must budget those fees as a variable expense because the board has the absolute authority to increase them, often without warning, based on unexpected costs or budget shortfalls.
And the immediate impact is absorbed entirely by the landlord because of the Residential Tenancies Act, the RTA.
Precisely. Under the RTA, rent increases are severely restricted. They're generally limited to an allowable annual guideline that the government mandates. So if the condo corporation votes for a 15% increase in maintenance fees mid-year,
You can't just pass that on.
you cannot simply pass that 15% increase along to the tenant. The landlord has to absorb that entire unplanned increase, and it eats directly into their profit margin until the legal anniversary date when they can apply the guideline increase.
But the truly devastating financial shock comes from what you called special assessments. This is the ultimate financial unpredictability that a traditional apartment landlord just never has to worry about.
A special assessment is the financial equivalent of a nuclear surprise. It happens when the corporation faces an essential major repair, say the complete failure of the building's chiller system or critical structural repairs, but the existing reserve fund isn't enough to cover the cost.
So the board just levies a fee.
The board votes to levy an immediate, often substantial one-time fee onto every single unit owner.
Give us a real-world example of what that could look like for an investor.
Okay, let's say a major roof replacement or a garage membrane repair is required, costing $5 million. If the building has 250 units, that could translate to a special assessment of $20,000 per unit, due in 90 days.
$20,000. Wow.
And the landlord must absorb this cost entirely. They can't raise the rent to cover it, they can't bill the tenant for it, and they certainly can't budget for it if they haven't done their homework.
So what is the preventative due diligence? What must a landlord do before they even buy the unit to guard against this kind of catastrophe?
They have to review two critical documents that you get from the status certificate: the building's reserve fund study and the minutes from the last annual general meeting.
Yeah, what's a reserve fund study?
It's a detailed, long-term projection done by an engineering firm that assesses the remaining life expectancy of the building's major components: the roof, HVAC, elevators, and it calculates how much money the corporation should have set aside.
And if they don't have enough?
If the reserve fund is significantly underfunded compared to what the study says they need, the risk of a special assessment is imminent.
That makes the status certificate not just a disclosure document, but the landlord's primary financial risk assessment tool.
It's everything. And furthermore, financial planning has to account for bulk service contracts. Many newer condos include centralized systems for cable, internet, or utilities, and the cost is bundled into the maintenance fee.
And the landlord lists those as included in the rent.
Usually. But what if the corporation cancels a bulk contract mid-lease? Maybe they decide to save money by having residents get their own internet.
Then the landlord has a problem.
A big one. Since the tenant signed a lease that included that amenity, the landlord may be required to negotiate a rent reduction, to compensate the tenant for having to get their own individual service contracts and potentially at a higher cost than the bulk rate.
So the landlord has to maintain the value they promised in the lease, even if the corporation changes its mind.
Exactly.
Now, here's where it gets really complicated and risky for investors. Navigating new construction in this structure of interim occupancy. You mentioned the deed hasn't even transferred yet.
This is a major minefield. The interim occupancy period is the window between when the unit is deemed habitable and when the entire building is legally registered as a condominium corporation and the deeds are transferred to the buyers.
And during this time.
During this time, the developer is the sole legal owner of the entire project.
So the person who bought the unit and intends to be the landlord is just an interim occupant, paying fees to the developer. How does this affect leasing?
The developer's power is absolute. Their purchase agreement probably contains extremely restrictive leasing clauses. Leasing might be prohibited entirely or only allowed with the developer's specific written permission. The developer can charge substantial administrative fees for processing these requests. They can restrict advertising.
To stop the building from looking like a rental facility.
Right, and they have zero obligation to the RTA yet because they are the sole owner.
So a buyer who intends to be a landlord could purchase a unit and then be legally prevented from renting it for 6 months or more until registration is complete. That completely torpedoes their financial projections.
Exactly. And the fees the interim owner pays aren't traditional rent or maintenance fees. They are interim occupancy fees, which are calculated based on interest on the unpaid balance of the purchase price, estimated common expenses, and estimated property taxes. They're often non-negotiable and very complex.
And regarding amenities, since they are often the last things finished, how does the landlord negotiate rent when the tenant might not have access to the pool or gym for the first 3 months?
Transparency and a temporary price reduction are essential here. The landlord has to acknowledge that the unit is incomplete from an amenity perspective. They need to negotiate a temporary reduced rent, say $200 less per month, and specifically define it as an amenity credit until those services are functional.
And if they don't?
If they fail to offer this, the tenant could argue the landlord has breached a fundamental condition of the lease, leading to disputes and potential claims for compensation.
Moving beyond finance, the legal burden on the landlord regarding tenant conduct is intense. The liability here is, non-transferable. It rests entirely on the unit owner.
The landlord is the ultimate guarantor of their tenant's behavior. The Condominium Act explicitly makes the landlord legally liable for the tenant's non-compliance with any condo rules, the bylaws, or the declaration. The corporation bypasses the tenant and holds the owner responsible.
So what are the landlord's immediate statutory duties on disclosure when a lease is signed?
They have to move swiftly. Within 10 days of entering into a lease or renewal, the landlord must provide the tenant with an up-to-date, legible copy of the declaration, bylaws, and rules. And this is an ongoing duty. If the board votes on a new rule next month, the landlord has to immediately forward that change to the tenant and make sure they understand the new obligation. Failure to disclose doesn't exempt the tenant from the rules, but it certainly puts the landlord in a weaker legal position later on.
Let's walk through a common breach. The tenant violates a noise rule repeatedly. What's the corporation's enforcement pathway, and how does the landlord get dragged into it?
The corporation's manager will typically issue a written warning to the tenant first, citing the specific rule they breached. At the same time, they notify the landlord that their tenant is in breach.
Okay.
If the tenant ignores the warning, the corporation escalates. They might start levying daily or weekly fines assessments against the unit, not the tenant.
And since those fines are against the unit, the landlord has to pay them.
Correct. The corporation holds the landlord responsible for all enforcement costs, including those fines and potentially the corporation's legal fees if they had to hire a lawyer. The landlord's only recourse, then, is to pursue the tenant under the RTA, maybe for substantial interference, to try and recover those costs. But the immediate financial liability belongs to the investor.
This inherent risk makes insurance a critical shield. We need to define exactly why the landlord's own property insurance is mandatory, even if the tenant carries their own coverage.
Requiring the tenant to carry liability and contents insurance is step one. It should always be in the lease. However, tenant insurance is not enough protection for the owner.
Why not?
Because the tenant might be underinsured, they might let the policy lapse mid-lease, or most commonly, they might be liable for damages, but refuse to pay the deductible required by the condo corporation's master policy.
And what's this deductible chargeback risk?
So the condominium corporation carries a master policy for the building structure. If a tenant causes damage, say they leave a tap running and flood the unit below, the corporation pays for the repair but charges the deductible, which can be anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000, back to the unit owner whose tenant caused the damage.
And the landlord's insurance needs to cover that.
The landlord's dedicated property insurance must cover this deductible chargeback, along with loss of rental income, liability for injuries in the unit, and costs for interior repairs above what the corporation covers.
You also raised a critical insurance failure point. Non-disclosure.
This is a major trap. If a landlord uses the unit for prohibited activities like advertising for short-term rentals and they fail to disclose this to their insurer, the insurance policy is instantly voided.
So if a short-term renter causes a fire,
The insurance company can legally deny the claim, making the landlord 100% financially responsible for potentially millions in damages. Honesty with the insurer about the exact leasing terms is absolutely non-negotiable.
finally, for the absentee investor, we discussed landlord participation and proxy voting as a survival mechanism. If you are not there, how do you protect your investment from bad board decisions?
Engagement is mandatory, even if it's inconvenient. Every board decision, the budget, rule changes, special assessments, directly affects the landlord's unit and cash flow. Attending the annual general meetings is the platform for the landlord to exercise their one vote, to question management, and to review the financial reports.
And if they can't attend, they can designate a proxy. What does that process look like?
They designate a proxy, often their property manager or real estate agent, to attend and vote on their behalf. The process requires using the standard prescribed proxy form. This form has to clearly grant the designated person the authority to vote on specific issues, especially the critical decisions about the budget or major repairs.
And if you don't attend or appoint a proxy,
You're forfeiting your voice in decisions that determine whether you make a profit or suffer a massive loss.
we've seen the tightrope the landlord walks, but that rope is felt most acutely by the person actually living in the unit. So let's switch perspectives and look at the residents' unique constraints, because life in a condo means trading a high-quality environment for a significant lack of individual autonomy.
And this lack of autonomy begins with how they're even permitted to use their own four walls. The rules strictly enforce residential use, and for the modern economy, this creates a lot of confusion. While working remotely on a computer is fine, activities that involve customer traffic, noise, or high liability are almost always prohibited.
Let's get specific. What kind of modern professional activities are typically barred under those rules?
Think about service-based in-person activities. A common example is a massage therapist, even if they only see 2 clients a day. The corporation can object because that's business traffic through the common elements.
Right.
Similarly, tutoring, music lessons, or even running a high-end interior design consultancy that requires frequent client meetings in the unit often contravene the rules because they impact the security and quiet enjoyment of other residents.
So any increase in foot traffic or noise above standard residential levels is a red flag.
A huge red flag, yeah. Mostly due to insurance and wear and tear concerns.
Beyond business use, the corporation also has the power to enforce occupancy limits.
Condominium bylaws can establish and enforce occupancy standards, typically adhering to the standard of 2 people per bedroom. And the power of this bylaw is that the corporation can take direct enforcement action against the unit for overcrowding.
Which means fines for the landlord.
Exactly, which
Got it.
then pressures the tenant for compliance.
And the speed of enforcement for nuisance issues has also accelerated through something called the Condominium Authority Tribunal, or CAT. How does CCAT impact the tenant experience?
CAT is an online tribunal designed for speedy resolution of issues related to compliance, particularly nuisance issues like excessive noise, constant secondhand smoke, or persistent odors.
So it's fast.
Very fast. If a tenant is creating a nuisance, the corporation can quickly take the unit owner to see for an order forcing compliance. Now, KEY cannot issue an eviction order, that's still the landlord and tenant board's job, but a KEY compliance order significantly speeds up the process for the landlord if they later need to pursue eviction.
Let's discuss the pet issue, because this is a frequent point of contention where condo rules and the RTA seem to clash. How can a condo corporation legally override the general RTA principle that limits no pet clauses?
This is a great question, and it speaks directly to the hierarchy of law. While the RTA limits a landlord from enforcing a blanket no pets clause in a lease, the Condominium Act grants the corporation a much broader power.
Which is?
the authority to create rules necessary for the safety, security, and welfare of the owners.
Ah, so it's a different legal basis.
Yeah. Exactly. A well-drafted condo rule using this power can restrict the size, weight, or number of pets. Only one dog under 30 pounds. Furthermore, if a pet is deemed a nuisance, say a dog that barks constantly, the corporation can legally demand its removal to protect the welfare of the owners.
So the tenant needs to understand that the condo rules create a much stricter layer of restriction on pet ownership.
Much stricter than in a traditional rental, yes.
Moving inside the unit, the tenant's ability to even customize or make minor cosmetic changes is heavily constrained.
Absolutely. The building infrastructure is paramount. A tenant cannot make any structural changes, opening a wall, moving a plumbing line, adding major electrical outlets, without approval from both the landlord and the board of directors.
And the board needs to make sure it doesn't compromise the building.
Or the insurance, or the common elements, exactly.
What about seemingly harmless cosmetic changes that might still be prohibited?
Things that impact the building envelope are often banned, so installing satellite dishes is often a no-go because of the risk of penetrating the building exterior. Another common one is installing permanent flooring or carpeting on a balcony.
Why that? It seems cosmetic.
The board bans it because it can trap water, preventing necessary drainage and potentially accelerating the deterioration and water damage of the concrete slab underneath. If a tenant installs a prohibited item, the landlord is forced to pay for its removal.
And access to the common elements requires a ton of compliance. A tenant can't just walk in and use the gym.
No, they have to register with management for everything. Getting a fob for access, getting their name on the intercom, registering their car for parking, registering for package delivery.
Yeah, the rules can change.
Exactly. Common element use is regulated by complex schedules, and those regulations are dynamic. The board could vote to impose a new fee for visitor parking or restrict the hours the rooftop patio is open. The tenant, despite having zero say, has to adapt.
And then there's the logistical nightmare of move-in logistics. This is a perfect example of how the collective governance prioritizes the building's function over the individual's convenience.
Moving into a high-rise condo is rarely a simple affair. Management typically requires move-ins to be booked days or weeks in advance, often limiting it to 1 or 2 per day to avoid elevator strain.
And there are strict time windows.
Strict time windows like 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. on weekdays only. The tenant often has to pay a substantial damage deposit, maybe hundreds of dollars, which is held until the move is complete and the common areas are inspected for damage.
This all culminates in the tenant's lack of voice. They have full compliance obligations, but zero representation in the system that dictates their daily life.
It's the core trade-off. They benefit from the high quality of the collective management, but they sacrifice their autonomy. The tenant can't attend owners' board meetings. They can't vote on crucial decisions like the budget or major rule changes. If they have a concern about a noisy neighbor or a new rule they don't like,
They have to go through their landlord.
they have to channel that complaint through their landlord, who has only a single vote against the majority of other owners. So if the board dismisses the landlord's concern, the tenant has no internal mechanism for appeal or recourse within the condo structure itself.
Now let's discuss a critical vulnerability for condo tenants, the critical tenancy termination risk. This risk of being forced to vacate is significantly higher than in traditional rental situations.
That is absolutely true because condo units are primarily investment vehicles. Under the RTA, a landlord can give notice of termination requiring 60 days if they sell the unit and the buyer requires vacant possession for their own or their immediate family members' personal use. This is a common occurrence in a hot real estate market.
And there's a vital compensation nuance here related to who is taking possession.
Pay close attention to this. If the landlord themselves, the unit owner, decides to move back into the unit or have their family member move in, the tenant is entitled to 1 month's rent as compensation. However, if the landlord sells the unit and it's the buyer who requires possession, the RTA explicitly states that the tenant is not entitled to any financial compensation.
So they just get 60 days notice and that's it.
That's it. They walk away with nothing but 60 days notice. This makes the long-term condo tenant highly vulnerable to market fluctuations in sales.
That significantly increases the inherent risk for long-term residents. Finally, let's tackle the ultimate financial protection mechanism for the tenant, the turning the rent risk, which only applies when the landlord defaults.
This is the tenant's legal fail-safe against a negligent landlord. The scenario is simple. The landlord stops paying their mandatory maintenance fees, creating a substantial debt to the corporation.
Okay.
Under the Condominium Act, the corporation has the legal right to bypass the landlord and demand that the tenant pay their monthly rent or an amount equal to the defaulted fees directly to the corporation instead. This is the act of attorning the rent.
This sounds alarming for the tenant. Suddenly, they're paying a stranger instead of their landlord. What legal mechanism ensures the tenant doesn't end up paying both?
This is fully protected by the law. Let's run through a practical example to make this concrete for you.
Please.
Imagine the tenant pays $2,500 in monthly rent. The landlord has defaulted, owing the corporation $4,000 in past due maintenance fees. The corporation issues a legal notice to the tenant demanding payment.
But they can't ask for the full $4,000.
No, only an amount equal to the monthly rent. So the corporation demands $2,500. The tenant now pays the full $2,500, but they pay it to the condominium corporation. They then pay $0 to the landlord.
And legally, they fulfill their rent obligation.
They have. The $2,500 paid to the corporation is applied to the landlord's outstanding debt. The following month, the corporation demands the remaining $1,500, and the tenant pays that to the corporation and the other $1,000 to the landlord.
So the law ensures the total outgoing payment from the tenant never exceeds their monthly rent, but the destination of that money changes. It's a powerful incentive for the landlord to stay solvent.
It is. The corporation extracts the outstanding fees from the owner through the tenant's rental income stream. It protects the collective and it protects the tenant.
To master these complexities, we need to understand the professionals involved and their specific duties. The real estate salesperson, in particular, carries a much higher burden of due diligence in a condo transaction compared to a simple house rental.
Absolutely. The salesperson is the primary interface translating the complexities of the corporation to both sides. Their core duty is information verification. They have to gather specific details, the unit size, its boundaries, the current maintenance fees, and most critically, they have to verify the accuracy of the rules by obtaining and reviewing the status certificate from the condo manager.
They can't just take the landlord's word for it.
No, they cannot. And that verification must happen early before marketing the unit. They have to confirm all board obligations. Is leasing even permitted? What's the minimum term? They have to confirm the use is strictly residential.
And for a first-time investor, the salesperson has to guide them to external expertise, right?
They must. They have to advise landlord clients to consult qualified specialists. This includes a condominium leasing lawyer, an insurance agent specializing in these complex condo policies, and an accountant, especially vital if the landlord is a non-resident of Canada.
What unique services might a salesperson offer to an absentee landlord to justify their involvement in this highly complex environment?
Well, they often transition into providing full-service property management. This goes beyond just collecting rent. It includes coordinating unit repairs, liaising with the condominium manager on rule enforcement, serving notices, and critically acting as the landlord's designated proxy at owners' meetings.
So they're paid to absorb the daily legal and operational burdens.
Exactly.
Let's clarify the management structure within the condo itself, starting with the condominium corporation's legal duties regarding leasing.
The corporation, through its board, has a statutory duty to maintain mandatory records of all leased units, names of tenants, contact info, a copy of the lease. They're responsible for identifying non-compliant tenants and notifying both the tenant and the landlord. They also have to communicate major updates, like budgets or new rules, to both the owners and the resident tenants.
And the condo management provider, the company hired by the board, actually implements these rules.
They're the operational arm. They draft the annual budget, coordinate maintenance, handle collection of unpaid fees, including that whole attorning the rent process, and ensure common amenities are safe and functional. They're the tenant's primary point of contact for common element issues.
Then you have the individual property manager hired by the landlord for their specific unit.
And that manager acts solely on behalf of the individual landlord. Their job is marketing the unit, screening tenants, collecting rent, arranging specific unit repairs, and acting as the intermediary between the tenant and the complex's condo management provider.
And serving as the proxy.
And often standing in for the landlord as that necessary proxy, yes.
Let's delve into the critical financial compliance issue for those property managers. The non-resident landlord tax rule. This is a massive area of liability.
This is non-negotiable compliance for any manager dealing with non-resident investors. If the unit owner resides outside of Canada, the individual property manager is legally deemed an agent of the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA.
That's not optional, it's a legal designation.
It's a legal designation under the Income Tax Act.
What does that designation obligate the property manager to do?
They must withhold 25% of the gross monthly rent, that's 25% of the total rent collected, before any expenses, and remit that withheld amount to the CRA. This 25% is an estimated deposit on the non-resident investor's annual Canadian income tax liability.
And why must the property manager do this?
To protect themselves. If the non-resident landlord fails to file a Canadian tax return and pay their income tax, the property manager is held personally and legally liable by the CRA for the entire amount of unpaid income tax on the gross rental revenue they managed.
So by remitting that 25% withholding, the manager fulfills their legal obligation and shields themselves from enormous potential liability.
That step is a cornerstone of professional, compliant condo property management.
This deep dive has clearly established that condo leasing is a system of three major layers. First, the tenant receives a superior, upgraded, highly amenitized living experience.
For sure.
Second, the landlord has to absorb significant, often unpredictable financial risks, while also shouldering the non-transferable legal liability for their tenant's conduct. And third, the overriding power of the condo corporation dictates the terms for everyone, regardless of what the individual lease agreement actually says.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, I think the ultimate lesson here is the stark trade-off of convenience for control. Condo living delivers a high standard of maintenance, amenities, and security that very few purpose-built rentals can match. But that standard is rigorously enforced, and it's paid for by a collective authority, the board, that legally supersedes the wishes of the individual owner or tenant.
You're effectively renting or investing within a legal democracy.
A democracy where your individual influence is intentionally minimized.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the learner, to consider the value of autonomy. Knowing the rules and restrictions is one thing, but how often do you need a genuine, influential voice in your living environment? Will the substantial benefits of a modern, highly managed complex, the concierge, the high security, the zero-maintenance lifestyle, outweigh the constant need to comply with collective financial decisions and rule changes that you had no power to influence? Understanding that fundamental exchange is the true key to mastering the complexities of condo leasing.